Every year, children spill into the streets, pillowcases in hand, hoping to score a good scare and maybe, if they're lucky, a Butterfinger. But is this holiday simply a fun-filled romp or something far more despicable? Today we explore several conspiracy theories surrounding Halloween. For many, Halloween is nothing more than a fun excuse to dress up like your favorite Stranger Thing and have a good time. But for others, this holiday isn't just an innocent time, but instead a clandestine Satanist holiday with the intent to open a fiendish, profane portal for Satan himself to lure us into temptation and wrap us in his clutches. Certain religious communities in the US, such as some evangelical Christians, do not celebrate Halloween due to its perceived connections to the occult and potential concerns over devil worship. But historically, Halloween is less associated with Satan and more associated with traditions outside of Christianity. Halloween is said to have evolved from All Hallows' Eve, which itself actually evolved out of the ancient Celtic pagan holiday of Samhain, a 3-day fire festival that essentially celebrated death and rebirth. It is thus sometimes also referred to as the Feast of the Dead. The word Samhain translates in modern Irish to summer's end. The holiday marked the end of the summer, or the light period. Because of the timing, it was both a celebration of the harvest season and perhaps the last moments of ease before a cold, dark, long, and challenging winter. Samhain celebrated the dead, and particularly, the celebratory feast paid homage to loved ones who had passed away recently. In pagan tradition, death was not necessarily feared. Rather, it was considered a necessary part of life. That being said, some sources also say that there was a considerable amount of fear and terror of the supernatural during this time, such as fear of the tricks the gods and unfriendly spirits could play on the living. While many of the traditions and rituals have been lost, we do know that there was an element of sacrifice in Samhain rituals, generally of crops or animals. In addition to the sacrifices, the festivals also included bonfires, and many of the participants would dress in costumes, meant to keep the mischievous spirits from being able to recognize, target, or harm them. With Roman invasion, most of the Celtic land was conquered by Rome in 43 CE. The spread of Christianity and Catholicism would force pagan Celtic traditions to evolve or be completely suppressed. In part, many Celtic traditions and popular pagan practices were reframed to fit within a Christian narrative as a way of converting people with greater comfort and ease. Until about the 7th century CE, All Hallows' Eve actually fell on May 13th. And it was only by papal decree that the date was changed to reflect the pagan calendar. In 609 CE, Pope Boniface IV declared All Saints' Day would now fall on November 1st, instead of in May. All Hallows' Day was intended to be a day to celebrate the Christian saints and martyrs. Essentially, instead of paying homage to pagan gods and the mischievous spirits and ghosts as they would have done on Samhain, they now celebrated Christian figures. Additionally, instead of making sacrifices or offerings to the gods and spirits, the Christian twist instead focused on making offerings of food to the poor. Eventually, Halloween evolved as a more secular version of All Hallows' Eve, and in time became a more popular and common practice than All Saints' Day. While satanic roots can be easily debunked, Halloween as it was celebrated then and now is certainly different. Like most holidays, someone is making money off of it, as is the case with Halloween for candy companies all over America. But where did trick-or-treating come from? Was it truly just a marketing ploy to sell candy? And are we the biggest goobers in the Milky Way shelling out 100 grand like suckers, while big candy snickers as they make off with a huge score and a fat payday? There may be several potential origins for trick-or-treating, and one might be in the Celtic tradition associated with Samhain called mumming. Mumming refers to a practice where a troupe of unofficial actors would go home to home, performing to residents in exchange for food and drink. It may also have its roots in a 16th century English custom for All Souls' Day, which takes place the day after All Saints' Day. At the time, the poor often used to beg door to door on this day. and the tradition slowly fell on the children of the families. A typical response was to give these children soul cakes, which were decorated with crosses in exchange for the children's prayers. If not the 16th century, another potential origin for candy and Halloween may actually come from an old Christmas tradition called Belsnickeling. In the 18th and 19th centuries, regions of the eastern United States and Canada practiced Belsnickeling, where people would put on costumes and travel door to door in small groups to perform small talents or tricks in exchange for food or beverages. By some accounts, some treated this as a game, only giving treats to people who were disguised successfully enough that they couldn't be recognized. By other accounts, some participants would intentionally try to scare children before asking them if they had been good enough for a treat. Handing out individually wrapped candies began during the late 1800s simply because it was easier. The practice started gaining popularity in the 1920s and 30s. Today, Halloween is the second largest commercial holiday in the United States. In October 2021, the National Retail Federation estimated that Americans would collectively spend $3 billion on Halloween candy. However, there is no evidence that any of the events that led to the popularization of individually wrapped candies becoming the primary treat given out for Halloween was the work of candy companies. Instead, it is the culmination of many individual events and shifts over time. But if big business isn't the scariest part of trick-or-treating, one thing might be. During a time when scary stories were passed around with the same frequency as fun-sized M&Ms, it was only a matter of time until stories of devious opportunists tampering with children's candy began to spread and fill the hearts of American parents with fear. But is there any reality to the concern? It is largely believed that a New York Times op-ed published on October 28, 1970, began the speculation that strangers could possibly utilize trick-or-treating as a twisted way to poison children. The piece, written by Judy Kleemsrud, cited two unconfirmed incidents in upstate New York to back up the theory. Kleemsrud posited that the, quote, plump red apple from a kindly old lady down the block may have a razor blade hidden inside. While the editorial was an opinion piece, many readers ended up accepting it as fact. However, what many didn't know was that these two incidents were unconfirmed. 2 days after Kleemsrud's piece was published, a 5-year-old boy from Detroit died from consuming heroin that his uncle claimed was present in his Halloween candy. Sadly, it was later discovered that the heroin was found within the uncle's home, not in his Halloween candy. There are, however, a few rare instances that may have led these fears to last as long as they have. In 1959, 30 children in California fell ill after ingesting Halloween candy. The candy in question had been handed out by a dentist and were actually laxative pills coated in candy, according to UPI and the New York Times articles from that year. On Halloween in 1974, a child in Houston did in fact die as a result of eating poisoned candy, but it was not a stranger who gave the child the candy. Tragically, the child's father had murdered his son by adding cyanide to a pixie stick. This story quickly blew up, and the fear of poisoned candy continued to spread throughout the nation, despite the origins of the poisoned candy. In a 1975 Newsweek article, an unverified statement was published, quote, over the past several years, several children have died and hundreds have narrowly escaped injury from razor blades, sewing needles, and shards of glass put into their goodies by adults. The fear continued throughout the next decade, and by the 1980s, some areas had banned trick-or-treating. Some hospitals in metropolitan areas offered the public the option to X-ray their Halloween candy. On Long Island, one community group offered prizes to children who stayed home on Halloween night in 1982. That same year, the New Jersey governor even signed a bill requiring a jail term for anyone who tampered with candy. However, this threat was largely imagined. A comprehensive study from 1985 looked at 30 years of alleged poisonings from Halloween candy and found 0 confirmed incidents of a child's death or serious injury. The study's lead researcher, sociologist Joel Best, declared the fear as an urban legend. Even the few confirmed cases of tampered candy that we do know of either did not result in serious injury, such as the laxative, or were not actually poisoned by the families who distributed the goodies, but instead by a family member of the child, such is the case with the pixie sticks. A closer look at the time in which these theories gained popularity shines a light on what might have been the real reason these concerns took off. At the time, distrust was at an all-time high. Stories were dominating the news concerning Vietnam, the Watergate scandal, multiple serial killing sprees, and the Satanic Panic, as mentioned in previous videos. News outlets and police fed the fear of this and many other moral waves of panic. Several hoaxes have also kept this urban legend alive. Each year, Snopes posts a roundup of fake stories circulating about needles in Halloween candy or poisoned candy. Often, these fake claims are posted to Facebook by adults, who then have their posts shared thousands of times.
Regardless of the reality of this threat, and I probably don't need to tell you this, it's still a good practice to check your children's candy before letting them eat any.
The symbol of a black cat has become synonymous with bad luck, witches, and consequently, Halloween. But why? And are black cats adopted more regularly around Halloween to be used as sacrificial offerings? And if so, to who? It appears that looking back in history, there are very few times in which black cats didn't have a bad reputation. According to the Daily Journal in Greek mythology, Zeus's wife Hera made herself a servant named Galinthius, and as punishment, she turned her into a black cat. Galinthius in her new form worked for Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft and death, and so, by association, all black cats became the figure for bad omens and evil. According to the Animal Welfare League, it was during the medieval period, 500 CE to 1500 CE, that negative superstitions started with black cats. Many people strongly believed that witches would utilize black cats to help carry out evil deeds and help speak to the devil. When Puritans came to America, their faith associating black cats with witches was still held very strongly. During the Salem witch trials, which saw more than 200 people punished for witchcraft and 19 people hanged, black cats were painted to be co-conspirators to their human companions and were accused of performing witchcraft themselves. In the 1903 classic The Book of the Cat, Francis Simpson writes, "It was believed that the devil borrowed the coat of a black cat when he wished to torment his victims. Because of this, many black cats were often chased, tortured, or burned alive, especially during religious festivals." The Book of the Cat also recounts a trial in the 17th century. Quote, "A woman condemned as a murderess was put to death in an iron cage over a slow fire, and 14 poor, unoffending cats were made to share the same fate." The superstition and folklore surrounding black cats was ingrained so deeply that it would last well into modern times. Even today in the United States, many people believe black cats bring bad luck or are altogether evil, and because of this stigma, these furry friends can often be susceptible to some major harm. According to the Connecticut Post, a study in 2019 done by Haley D. Jones and Christian L. Hart stated that, quote, "It has been found that black cats take the longest to adopt, with black cats taking approximately 2 to 6 days longer to adopt than cats with other coat color." According to Stephanie Bell, senior director at PETA, quote, "The lead up to Halloween can be a dangerous time for black cats. Some shelters used to carry out promotions during Halloween, in which they would lower the fees or waive them entirely for people who wanted to adopt black cats. However, due to many growing concerns about possible mistreatment and abuse, the majority of shelters have stopped this practice. Some don't allow any black cat adoptions for the entire month of October. For better or for worse, black cats linked to all that is mystical and magical, including witchcraft throughout the centuries, will hold as a symbol in our Halloween festivities forever."
Unfortunately, during this season, misinformation is shared just as easily as a good fright or a Charleston chew. But with the proper information and a little awareness, we can respect the history, have fun, and most importantly, stay safe.